Studies have shown that like 90% of all compromises happen through email phishing attacks.
Online privacy, online security. Is there really such a thing in today's everything goes and everything gets posted digital world? What about the companies who do business with us? What about their security and privacy? Is privacy even good or bad? And for who does privacy really apply to? When did we even start being concerned with privacy? What laws protect us or take it away? And what about our children? What if I told you that the last federal law protecting people from cyber intrusion was passed in the 1980s, before there was an internet, or that there's no federal law expressly protecting your privacy, or that the only federal child protection law is now 20 years old and hasn't been updated, or that our computerized election systems are at risk, and that most of the laws passed since the 1980s pretty much protect companies and not as much individuals, or that companies want to keep you from suing them in court if they're responsible for privacy invasions or other cybercrime. Sounds paranoid, doesn't it? Want to learn more about cyber protection laws and how they affect you, your family, and our nation? Join me, Steven Teppler, on the CyberLaw Now podcast, where I'll be joined by Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Compensation Insurance, Jim Murray. He's also a renowned cybersecurity expert, and we'll talk about privacy and security challenges and the landscape of them facing businesses that face you and face them.
Malicious software. The robots are coming.
They say we are not prepared.
Spying, snooping.
It's scary.
Hi, I'm attorney Steven Teppler, and welcome to the CyberLaw Now podcast. I chair the cybersecurity and privacy practice at law firm Mandelbaum Salzberg. Here at CyberLaw Now, we discuss today's cybersecurity issues, look at the legal issues, make you aware of them, how they affect you, your family, the country, and what we can do to protect ourselves. I am absolutely thrilled today to have as our guest Jim Murray, who's the Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Compensation Insurance, and he's also a renowned cybersecurity expert. And we'll talk about the privacy and security challenges and landscape facing businesses and facing businesses that face you, the public. Jim, welcome. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why this area is of special interest to you.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you again for having me. Anytime I get an opportunity to talk about cybersecurity, that's a good day for me. I've been in the cybersecurity field for about 14 years now. I started off on the technical side, working my way up from the help desk all the way up through computer support. I was a network engineer for a little while, and for the past 12 years have been filling in a number of different information security positions, most recently as the security architect for NCCI, or the National Council on Compensation Insurance, and for the last couple of years as the leader of a 12-person team of cybersecurity professionals trying to protect the organization. Additionally, I also teach security on the side for a computer security training company, and am involved in a number of organizations, local cybersecurity organizations such as the ISSA and InfraGard, the FBI private sector cooperative.
Wow, that's great. Tell us a little bit about InfraGard, if you can, and what InfraGard aims to do in protecting our cybersecurity infrastructure.
Sure. InfraGard is a fantastic organization. It is a organization that is a cooperative organization between the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the private sector. It doesn't cost anything to join InfraGard other than a background check. And the benefits that you get out of InfraGard are the ability to interface and network with not only members of the business community in your area, but also with law enforcement, federal law enforcement. One of the things that I always tell folks when I'm doing training is you really don't want to wait until you have an incident before you meet the people that you are going to need to help you with that incident. And one of those is law enforcement. And so InfraGard provides you the capability to get familiar with your local law enforcement like the FBI, and build those relationships early so that if you have an incident, a data breach, or a ransomware event, or any kind of cybersecurity event, you've already got those relationships built with law enforcement and you know who to call. And it makes things much, much easier.
Wow. And anybody can join. Is that correct? You don't need to be employed by the government or necessarily even in a business. You can be Joe Smith off the street as long as you pass the background check.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the business side. I think with InfraGard, you might have to be related to a business, but it doesn't cost anything to join. The background check is there. And most organizations, the nice thing about the FBI is they really have a great community outreach program. So even for normal citizens, if you find that InfraGard is strictly for business, the FBI also has things like the Citizens Academy, where you can sign up, and it's a 8 to 12 week program where you get to interface with your local FBI agents and local FBI employees and learn about what the FBI does and how they work to protect us all.
That's great news. My question, and I've always wanted to ask this question to a cybersecurity professional like you, is how you view the difference between privacy and security, and from within the perspective of your organization or the companies for whom you might consult.
So that's a great question. Privacy primarily is around keeping that sensitive information, which we hold very close, whether that's trade secrets, whether that's personally identifiable information, personally identifiable health information, intellectual property. That's keeping that information protected from people who we don't want to see that information, or who shouldn't be allowed to see that information. The security part of that is how we go about accomplishing that protection. In a lot of cases, it's through administrative controls such as policies, procedures, those kinds of things. And in a lot of cases, it's technical controls like encryption, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, those kinds of things. So privacy is really looking at the information that is sensitive, the information that should be kept confidential, the information that we don't want the public to see, and security is the means by which we protect that information.
So from my legal perspective, from my lawyer's perspective, I would almost simplify it, and you can correct me, as privacy being what we want to do about information, and security is how we go about doing it. Would that be a correct characterization?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good characterization.
Thank you for that. When we come back, we'll talk more with Jim Murray, who is the Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Compensation Insurance and renowned cybersecurity expert, where we'll talk a little bit more about businesses that face consumers and how their privacy and security issues are being challenged and dealt with on a day-to-day basis. Welcome back to the CyberLaw Now podcast. I'm attorney Steven Teppler, and I'm really excited to have with me today Jim Murray, who is the Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Compensation Insurance. He's also a renowned cybersecurity expert, and we have been talking about businesses that face consumers, those businesses that do business with us on an everyday basis, their privacy and security concerns, and talking about what they're doing about it and what challenges they're facing. So, Jim, what would you say are the biggest challenges for a business right now that deals with consumers like you and me when we're in our consumer buying, selling, getting, purchasing goods and services on an everyday basis?
I think the biggest challenge for businesses nowadays is understanding what information that they have and understanding the true value or the true privacy aspects of that information. I think the privacy landscape is rapidly changing. In the United States, historically, we've had, as you mentioned in the introduction, very few laws that have addressed privacy. And the laws that we have had have been really focused around, if that privacy gets compromised, what are you supposed to do? Mainly the breach notification laws. With the adoption of the GDPR law over in Europe, that really moved to strengthen consumer privacy, the United States has taken note of that, and a number of states have begun to put more meatier or beefier privacy laws in place. California's just adopted their privacy law, and the New York financial services law has a lot more meat in it, as opposed to just breach notification. It also talks about the requirements that a business must go through to protect information. And the organization that we are governed by, the National Council on Compensation Insurance, which is the NAIC, has also put out a model law for the states, which has been adopted by South Carolina, to provide prescriptive guidance on how we need to protect consumer information. And so a lot of businesses that have this type of information, whether it's consumer information or personally identifiable information, personally identifiable health information, really need to pay attention to the legal landscape out there, because it's rapidly changing. And if they don't pay attention to it, it's going to be very tough for them when a compromise happens, because they're going to get caught behind the 8 ball.
Thanks for that. I think that what we're about to open is Pandora's box. And I'm going to ask Jim if you can go into a little bit of detail. You mentioned both new laws, one relatively new in New York that has to do with cybersecurity and disclosures and requirements, and the brand new law that I believe only goes into effect in 2020 in California. Have you given any attention to how you're advising clients to comply with either of these laws? And to the extent you have, start with New York and then let's cross the country and go to California if you can.
So, sure. The biggest challenge with the laws is, even though they've gotten more prescriptive in trying to identify the types of things that organizations need to have in place, information security programs, identity and access management, where you're keeping track of who has access to what, and you're regularly reviewing that, risk assessment programs, those kinds of things. The laws are still very vague in how to do that. So typically the guidance that I like to give to folks is, read the law for what it's worth and understand that the law is not black and white. The law has a lot of gray area in it. So the best thing that you can do is practice due diligence when you're configuring systems, when you're configuring, when you're writing policy. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of guidance out there on best practice, on how to configure systems securely, whether that's through the Center for Internet Security or most of your vendors nowadays, whether it's VMware or Microsoft or Oracle, all have prescriptive guidance on the how. Get involved with organizations like InfraGard, like the local ISSA chapters that you have in your areas, and make sure that you are doing the due diligence necessary to protect the information the best that you can now. The other guidance that I also give is that this cannot be solely on the back of your security organization or your security folks in your organization. It has to go all the way up to the board of directors, to senior management, and they have to be champions of that cause.
You bring up a good point, Jim, and that is that this has to be brought up the ladder, up the chain of command in a large organization. But we have a lot of small businesses out there that are Not mom and pops. They can be making a lot of money, have a huge amount of gross revenues, but not a lot of people involved in the business itself. These businesses that are run by lots of my listeners are also covered by these laws, or will be covered by these laws. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. That's why it's extremely important that even the small businesses, and I understand that you're with a small business, you're trying to make ends meet, and you've got employees to pay and everything. However, it is the small businesses a lot of times that if you do have one breach, it is very difficult to absorb that breach. And so a lot of the information that I recommend is just as, if you're starting to grow your business, you would go out and you would find a good financial reference, an accountant. You should also be doing the best you can to interface with a good legal representative that can make sense of the landscape for you, take a look at the kind of information that you're taking in, the kind of information that you're handling, and provide that guidance to you on here are the laws that you should pay attention to, and here are the things that you need to consider as you grow your business when it comes to privacy and cybersecurity.
So interesting. Hearing this from a technologist's perspective, from a cybersecurity expert's perspective. What's equally interesting here is how these laws can affect both small and large businesses, and how much more, as you say, prescriptive, which means telling businesses what they need to do in order to not fall afoul of either a lawsuit, regulatory action, penalties, sanctions, you name it. And, there's an increasing sense among people that all of their information is going to be out there no matter what. And these laws are designed in large part to help prevent that. Security is a process, will never be perfect. It just doesn't work like that. It's a leapfrog situation where every time we fix something or create a solution to a cybersecurity problem, another problem will crop up because there are so many moving parts in an information ecosystem. I think what we have to keep in mind also, and I think you'd agree with me, is that the different brands, the different categories of information that's sensitive to people also dictate the kind of security you might want to have, even if you're a small business. If you're carrying healthcare information, personal health information, credit card information, which you should never, never, never harbor internally. There are many ways to protect that from breach, even if you're a small operation. And then there's just your generic, everyday name, address, phone number, what's the name of your children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, your social security number. When we come back, we'll talk more with Jim Murray, Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Compensation Insurance, where we'll talk a little bit about one of my favorite subjects, not because I like the idea or like the problem that it raises, and that problem is ransomware. Welcome back to CyberLaw Now. I'm attorney Steven Teppler, and I still am very excited to have with me Jim Murray, who's the Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Compensation Insurance. We've been talking about privacy, security, about challenges facing businesses that face consumers. So if a security problem is going to happen to a business and that business has consumers as its clients, we're going to have a problem too, because we're all consumers. So Jim, you and I were talking a little bit about ransomware before the podcast, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about where you see ransomware cropping up, why it crops up, what we can do as consumers, but what businesses might have to take care to do to prevent from happening so that they don't wind up getting into legal trouble.
Sure. So ransomware, which is basically where an attacker will get malicious software on a computer system and then make the information on that computer system unavailable, either by encrypting it, which is the most common method to do that, or simply by making the system unresponsive, and then requiring some sort of ransom or extortion in order to get that information back. Ransomware is a huge problem. We've seen instances in the news of hospitals and law firms being victims to ransomware. And you know that a particular piece of malicious software has made it to the big time when it ends up popping up in pop culture. right? And there have been a number of TV instances. For instance, my wife loves The Good Wife. And I remember an episode that they had where their law firm got hit by ransomware. So it has definitely made it to the big time. Ransomware typically gets in through probably the two most dangerous applications on any computer system, and that's internet browsing and email. So you're surfing the web, you went down the rabbit hole of the internet, searching for information or just browsing, and the next thing you know, you get a pop-up that tells you that your computer's been infected and you need to click here, or it downloads in the background without you even knowing it. And the next thing you know, you get a pop-up that says your computer's been compromised, or you get an email that tells you that your system's out of date and you're vulnerable to all kinds of malware. But if you click on this great link, you can patch your system and make it, so that the attackers can't get in. And that invokes an emotion of fear in you. So you click that link, and the next thing you know, you've got ransomware.
That's frightening.
Absolutely frightening. And with regard to ransomware, the main thing I tell folks is make sure that you have good backups. The FBI will tell you not to pay the ransom. I know at one point there had been something that came out that said, the FBI was telling folks to pay, but their official language on that now is don't pay the ransom. If the information is that important to you, the only way to put yourself in a position where you don't have to pay is to make sure that you have good backups of the information, whether that's your personal information or your corporate information. The other thing that I tell folks is you have to train your employees on things like social engineering, because that is the main way that ransomware is going to get into your organization. Studies have shown that like 90% of all compromises happen through email phishing attacks. So training your employees on social engineering, training them to trust their gut when something doesn't feel right, training them to pay attention to the emotions that get stirred up when they read an email, whether it's fear, anger, even happiness. You get an email that says, congratulations, you've just won 10 iPads that you can share with your family and friends. Click this link to redeem your prize, kind of thing. The mantra that I tell my folks here whenever I train about social engineering is when you're reading an email or you're on the internet, if it makes you mad, sad, or glad, it's probably bad.
That's so true. It's just so true. Ransomware, if you don't back up, you will have severe consequences. And even with the types of backups that you do, there's ransomware out there, as far as I'm aware, that will affect everything that's connected to your network. So it's possible that even a backup that's connected to your laptop or workstation might also be affected. There's one major drug company that was affected that took almost their entire company out of service, and it took them months and months and months to totally recover from that. Well, we've been to cybersecurity school today. A little bit of law, a little bit of cybersecurity, but we've just begun to touch the tip of the iceberg when it comes to business cybersecurity and how business cybersecurity affects consumer cybersecurity and our privacy. In the end, remember that business security means our security, and that's you and me, because most of the business now that we have ends up doing business with us and ends up being online. So I want to thank you very, very much, Jim Murray, who is the Corporate Security Information Executive for the National Council on Insurance Compensation. You've been incredible today. A bunch of great information, both for business as well as for consumers, on the privacy, on the security, and on the legal side. I hope to have you back on CyberLaw Now soon.
Anytime. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Don't forget to hit subscribe and get all of your podcasts while you sleep. Even share them with your friends. If you have a cyber law subject you want to hear more about, contact us. Join me, Steven Teppler, attorney at Mandelbaum, Salzburg, for the next CyberLaw Now podcast. Until next time, this is Steven Teppler on the CyberLaw Now podcast.